And this task force was created to help us better understand the opportunities and concerns around deep sea mineral exploration in our region. And so tonight we will hear from a range of expert voices, from technology developers to industry analysts and investors, and we'll also open the floor for your questions and thoughts. Your voice matters and your input is essential as the task force continues its work. Just a few quick house rules before we begin. We ask that you please silence all of your mobile devices. There will be a Q&A session after each speaker's presentation, and so when it is time, we ask that you please keep your questions brief and to the point so we can get to as many voices as possible. We also ask that during the Q&A to please raise your hand and wait for a microphone before speaking. And we are also monitoring the chat online, and we will be voicing that as well. We ask that everyone please approach this discussion with respect, curiosity, and a shared commitment to our future. Now, before we start, we would like to begin with a moment of prayer. Utival awatu fa alwalo, ilausunga Dr. Tapa'au Daniel Anga, mustato tausangay amatalia tato fa putspato. Say.
Se o tātou te talo I lumo le tua. Le tua le whaavava ue, lo mātou tamā wha le lang. Lea wa mai a te I mātou le alofa ma le anga le lei, o mātou vi ia pēr, lau o whio le nei a whiawhi. Lo mātou tamā o e sila whia le mafuanga, o le nei potsputonga, alofa mai, fesoa soani mai, e foa I mai ni manatu le lei, ni manatu e tonu ona o le nei matau pataua mo Amerika Samoa. Ia ta ina pēr I mātou le mana o lo nganga pa ia, a wale manuia ta mā matina mātutua, se I o lavai I pepe laiti. Anga lei ia I la tau o lo, tāpena ina le nei fonotanga, mai sfoi la tō mai atu nu mamao, ia mātou whaalongo, ia mātou moa se au onga leili nei a fiafi. Ala mātou tatalo lea I le suafa Jesu Keriso. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Anga, for inviting the Spirit of Heavenly Father to be with us tonight as we go throughout this discussion. To officially open tonight's forum, we would now like to welcome Mr. Michael McDonald, Assistant Director of Port Administration and Co-Chair of the Deep Sea Mining Task Force. He will provide context on the task force mission and why your public input matters in this process. Please help me welcome Mr. McDonald.
Talofa and good evening, everybody. As Don had shared, my name is Michael McDonald. I am Assistant Director of Business and Economic Development at the Port Administration and co-chair of the American Samoa Deep Sea Mining Task Force. On behalf of Honorable Governor Pula Li'i Nicolau Pula, Lieutenant Governor Pulu Mata'ala Ai Jr., and our entire task force, we welcome you. For those of you who are joining us online via the internet, again, thank you for being here tonight. Tonight's forum is the second forum that we've held on deep sea mining, and we're looking forward to a very informative evening tonight and a productive conversation. We have 3 speakers joining us remotely, all with experience in this emerging industry of deep sea mining. Tonight we'll be hearing from Mr. Scott Vincent. Scott is the president of the Critical Oceans Mineral Resource Center. We'll also be hearing from Mr. Oliver Gunasakara, who is the CEO of Impossible Metals. And finally, we'll be hearing from Victor Voskovo, who is the co-founder of Insight Equity, a private investment firm. But before we move on to our presentations, I'd like to recap where we are in this broader discussion regarding deep-sea mining in American Samoa, especially for those people in our community who are just now joining the conversation and beginning to follow along. Now, first of all, I pose the question, what is deep-sea mining? Now, it's important to note that there are several different methods of extracting natural resources from our ocean, but the deep-sea mining that we're discussing tonight is the harvesting of polymetallic nodules that sit unattached on the deep sea floor 5,000 meters below the ocean's surface. These nodules contain critical minerals that are used in technologies that are key to the energy transition that we're living through today. These critical minerals are used for electric vehicle batteries as an example, but there are several other uses for these critical minerals. In 2021, during my time as Assistant Director at the Department of Commerce, we had secured a grant from the EDA to explore new industries to help us diversify and strengthen our local economy. We began our research on deep-sea minerals back in 2021, so it's been 4 years that we've been tracking and learning about deep-sea mining. We began back then by engaging with people a lot smarter than us, people in the scientific community who have experience with deep-sea mining. And specifically, we sought to explore a couple of key points. Number one, whether or not deep-sea mining had true potential for the people of American Samoa. And two, more importantly, whether or not there were risks and what were the potential risks that deep-sea mining has to our economy and most importantly to our fisheries. Now last year in 2024, Impossible Metals filed a request for a commercial lease in our EEZ, or our Exclusive Economic Zone, which is really when most people here locally began to follow and track the discussion around deep-sea mining. At the time, BOEM, after engaging with the local government, BOEM is the agency that oversees the process of leasing our seabed. At the time, they did not act on Impossible Metals' request due to opposition, local opposition, and more specifically because of an executive order issued by then-Governor Lemanu. The EO issued at the time placed a moratorium on deep-sea mining in territorial waters. Now, more recently, this year, a few very important things have developed, and I'll recount them, and then we'll move on to our presentation. First, on April 15th, Impossible Metals refiled its request to BOEM for lease sale on our outer continental shelf. On April 25th, President Trump issued an executive order titled Unleashing America's Offshore Critical Minerals and Resources. Now, this executive order issued by President Trump was issued due to China's dominance in the critical minerals industry, highlighting our country's national security as a principal concern and a priority for the Trump administration. It followed on June 16th when BOEM issued a request for information and interest for commercial leasing in American Samoa's EEZ. And as of today, they are currently accepting public comments from the community and from those interested in, from the industry in participating in this process. So that's a brief recap and a little bit of background about deep-sea mining here in American Samoa over recent months and the past few years. Now, one of our key goals tonight is to continue this process of information gathering. We hope to provide our community with information and resources so that we are well informed and we understand the true benefits and risks behind deep-sea mining. We encourage you all to listen, to ask questions, and to voice your opinions through the BOEM portal online, and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction, how you would access that website between now and August 15th when the comment public comment period closes. So now we'll move on to our speakers. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Mr. Scott Vincent. Scott is the president of the Critical Oceans Mineral Research Center, and the title or topic of his presentation tonight is Deep Sea Extraction, Separating Fact from Fiction. Now, the public conversation around deep sea mineral extraction has often been shaped by environmental activist groups. While these organizations play an important and key role in holding industry accountable, they can sometimes do more harm than good when they prioritize stopping industry development over their mission to protect people and the planet. This presentation will explore some common misconceptions offered by activists and will aim to provide a balanced view around what is known and still unknown about deep sea nodule harvesting and their impacts. Scott will also touch on other topics including impact comparisons with terrestrial mining, economic viability of nodule harvesting, and the demand for energy minerals broadly. We'll turn the floor over now to Mr. Scott Vincent.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know if everyone can see that. I assume you will be able to see that. So thank you, Michael. Thank you to the audience. I appreciate the interest in the subject, and I think that you all are going about this the right way. You're hearing different opinions. There's a lot of people out there who have different viewpoints on this, and getting as much information is really important. I think high quality information is sometimes hard to come by in a new industry like this. So let me just give you a little bit of background here on myself to explain to you why I'm here. I'm first of all, I am an investor. I work for a private investment company. We have positions in a couple of companies, operators who aim to, who are exploring polymetallic nodule resources right now and who aim to hopefully harvest some of those resources in the future. And I wear two hats. My other hat is, as Mike referenced, the founder of the Critical Ocean Minerals Research Center. You can see that hopefully on the screen here. I call it Commerce, C-O-M-R-C, and our address is comrc.org. On our website, you will find a lot of information, a lot of reports. We lean heavily into the science and the data that's coming out of studies that are being done on the deep sea. And really, most importantly, we aim to push back on some of the narratives that are supplied by some of the activists who are against deep sea mining on this website. So how did I come to all of this? Well, it started about 15 years ago. When we started to investigate shallow water deposits around the world, mineral sands, diamonds, aggregates. We made a couple of investments. So it's important just for perspective here to note that, ocean extraction, natural resource extraction has been happening for a long time, many, many decades, and you can go even longer than that. In areas of the ocean that are much more densely inhabited than the abyssal plains, and in extraction operations, which are much more invasive than nodule harvesting. So in certain aspects, this is not new to mankind. Around 9 years ago, we were offered the opportunity to invest in a company that was looking at polymetallic nodules in the deep ocean, and at that point we began to look at various geologies in the deep ocean. As Mike mentioned, you have a variety. You have even methane hydrates, you have sulfides, you have crusts, and you have nodules. What really turned us on to the nodule opportunity was a few things, actually. First of all, this is an amazing resource. You have, in some areas, you have 7 commercial minerals in a single ball. in a single nodule. So you have the opportunity there to kind of do away with maybe 4 or 5 terrestrial mines with this resource when it's sized correctly. Beyond that, though, and as Mike also referenced, these nodules lie loose on the ocean floor, so it doesn't require drilling. It doesn't require cutting or bulldozing or blasting or removing mountaintops, right? We pick these up off the ocean floor. Oliver, who will speak later, has a technology that literally just picks these nodules up, and not to steal his thunder, but with a robotic arm. Others use what's called the Kawando effect, where they'll shoot water over the top of nodules, which creates a pressure differential, and the nodules are lifted and then gathered into a crawler. But it's non-invasive. Either of those technologies is non-invasive. So that's a big deal, that you can take these in a non-invasive fashion. Another big deal is the environment. This is a very remote part of the world. There is not much biomass down there, and we have data to show this, right? It is a fraction of a percent of what you find, say, in a tropical rainforest, and there's not a lot of biodiversity down there as well. Yes, there are thousands of species there, but that number just pales in comparison to a lot of the terrestrial locations where we're mining these same minerals today. So we looked at it in a big picture sense and said, this is yes, it's a potentially a very attractive investment, though there's a lot of risk to it. But our board pays special attention when we can find investments that create wins for society as well. And we thought this represented a huge win for society to extract these nodules. And one thing that I left out there is that obviously there are no humans on the abyssal plains. So no humans are being displaced by this activity. No humans are being made sick by effluents that's going into the fresh water around it. No humans are being made sick by the plumes of dust that settle on communities around terrestrial mines with this. So there's a huge human aspect to this that impressed us as well. So we got very excited about this, and we gave ourselves some pats on the back at finding such a unique and terrific opportunity to benefit society and benefit our shareholders. And we're surprised a couple years later when along came some environmental activists, namely WWF and Greenpeace and a few others, and said, no, you can't do this. They came out very strongly against this. And unfortunately, they started to fill the kind of the void out there of information with a lot of material that was erroneous, that was misinformation. And we have a section on our website that's dedicated to this misinformation. You'll find it there, and we can go through item by item by item all the misinformation that they supplied. So we were really disappointed by that. And, these groups are supposed to be there to protect people and planet. And it looks like they're not doing that. And, when I talk to people about this story, they say, well, Scott, why is that? Why would these groups aim to do something that is clearly going to hurt people and to hurt biodiversity? And I say we can only guess, but if you go to the WWF anti-seabed mining website, you'll find in the corner right there in a big button, donate now. It's certainly a part of their fundraising formula. And of course, the fact is not lost on them that if you put mining and ocean together in a sentence, you create a visceral response from people, a very negative response, and they've taken advantage of that. So they've raised a lot of money. Another thing that may be going on as well, we speculate about this, is that they have corporate partners, and they have WWF boasts about the fact that they have 1,000 of the richest people in this world in their membership. So they represent the establishment. They team with mining companies. They team with big consumer technology companies. And they team with very wealthy individuals who are all interested in furthering the status quo. So these companies, like these mining companies and computer technology companies, they have a lot to lose if their supply chains are disrupted. And if deep sea mining were to start to add minerals to the mix here, they derive a lot of competitive advantage often from their supply chains. So unfortunately, WWF and Greenpeace have come to represent the establishment, and we're here to say there's a better way to do this, but we have to get past that establishment. So what about this misinformation? Like I said, on the website, you'll find a lot more detail, but let's just address some of the larger points here that we hear often from these activists. And there's no point you hear more often than this argument that there's too much uncertainty attached to going after these nodules. And in the same breath, they'll say, we need to pause or we need to impose a moratorium as a result. And the idea is that, hey, there's no harm in pausing, right? We don't have enough information. We should just hold off. The fact of the matter is they'll never tell you, but there is quite a lot of harm involved in pausing, because every day that goes by where we're strip mining in highly populated areas next to humans, where we're kicking people off their land, we're poisoning people, and we're harming biodiversity, that's bad. That's bad for the world. So there is a cost. And as to uncertainty, there is uncertainty with respect to nodule harvesting for sure. But we should look at this argument about uncertainty in a broader context. Every day, we as a society deal with decision making under uncertainty. Every time there's a new technology that comes along or a new methodology for doing anything, there's going to be uncertainty involved in adopting it, because that's the nature of it. You don't know everything about it because it is new. But we make decisions under uncertainty by looking at both the costs and the benefits to make informed decisions, right? But if you look at the literature out there from these
Scott, I lost audio.
I got kicked off here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you back.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, let me reshare my screen here. I apologize. So if I told you that you couldn't introduce a COVID vaccine because 4 people could be infected with a disease as a result, you would say, well, Scott, we stand to save millions of lives here and make hundreds of millions of lives better. So you would do that cost benefit analysis. You would never make that decision by only looking at the costs and the risks. Yet that is what the activist community wants you to do. They want you to just look at the costs and the risks of this. So enough with that. What about the uncertainty attached to this activity? Well, the fact of the matter is there's not nearly as much uncertainty out there as these activists would like you to believe. We have been studying the impacts from nodule harvesting for over 50 years. In the last 10 years, industry has spent well over $500 million to understand the benthic environment, to understand the impacts from this activity. We've probably spent $1 billion over the last 50 years. So to say that there's tremendous uncertainty is definitely an overstatement. What have we found out with all of that work? What are the big takeaways? One of them is that the impacts from harvesting are highly localized. Okay, so you're clearly going to impact the area, the mining footprint where you drive the harvester, and you clearly impact a little sliver that goes out 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers from that by the plume from that harvesting vehicle. That plume only migrates a meter or two up. And like I said, it migrates a kilometer or two horizontally. That, by the way, that plume, we've shown with studies, isn't particularly damaging to the biodiversity or the biodensity of the creatures in the plume zone. We can also say, based on the data from these tests, that when we run that harvester through an area, we lose about 35% of the biodiversity, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. We lose about 50% of the biodensity or the amount of biomass that exists there. Now compare that with a strip mine. If you've ever been to a strip mine and looked at that big hole in the ground, well, you're going to see no biodiversity to speak of there and no real biodensity. So, these numbers need to be put in context relative to the alternatives, right? So what else do we know? We know that based on this research, that there isn't a whole lot of biodiversity. There's about 8,000 species that are said to inhabit the Clarion-Clipperton zone. By contrast, tropical rainforests hold about 4.4 million species. By the way, about 7,500 of those 8,000 species are still unknown to man. So there's uncertainty there. You don't know what those creatures, what their habitat is exactly, and how far they roam, and what risk they have of extinction when you harvest nodules. But in rainforests, there are about 3.7 million species that we don't know about. We haven't characterized. We don't understand their range or habitat well. So there is a lot more risk and uncertainty in some regards in terrestrial mining than there is in seabed mining. So all important things to keep in mind when it comes to this argument about uncertainty. There's less uncertainty than people would like to make you think. And there's a lot of certainty around the fact that we can spare lives, human lives, as well as biodiversity, when we supplant terrestrial mining with nodule harvesting, because we don't have humans on the abyssal plains. And to my way of thinking, and many of the people who consult with me at Commerce, that argument should really be the showstopper. We should not be talking about this anymore. If we have the ability to save human lives and reduce human suffering and reduce human displacement, potentially stop some of the conflicts that are happening in Africa and Indonesia because of this, well, that's reason enough to undertake this activity. I just think that's a really compelling argument, and one that's not appreciated very well out there. A couple of the other arguments that are made that deserve a little airtime. There's this idea that if you start nodule harvesting, well, you're not going to stop terrestrial mining. That's clearly true, right? But to the extent that we produce minerals from the bottom of the ocean, it will supplant the need to add on existing mines, or it could put terrestrial mines, out of business. It depends on the cost structure and the demand environment and a lot of things like that. But there is no doubt that if you bring on more minerals from the bottom of the ocean, it does reduce the need to open terrestrial mines. Some people will say, well, hey, you're gonna make these minerals much more affordable, and that's a bad thing. You'll have more demand, and to that we say, well, that's the point. If we can create abundance in these energy minerals, that will speed decarbonization, that will spare people's lives, that'll make the world better. So we're all for creating abundance in these minerals. It'll make batteries more efficient because engineers will be less constrained in the way they formulate batteries, and we could go on and on.
Scott, Scott, if I
yeah.
may, you have 2 minutes left, please.
Okay. There's an argument that the economics are not there to justify it. I would say that anyone who's making that argument is suspect, because if the economics don't justify it, then this won't happen. It's a really simple formula there. So that person is better off, watching reruns on television than making this argument. It's just a waste of hot air. If the economics aren't there, then this simply won't happen. Mike, I'll stop there and go to Q&A. I could keep going, but we'll just take Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation, Scott. There are a few questions online.
Great.
One of the questions, Scott, is regarding data. Someone is asking about the source of the data that is being analyzed. There's very little, if any, data in American Samoa's EEZ. Can you clarify where the vast majority of this data is being collected?
Right. Yeah, so the vast majority of this data is coming from international waters, not within Samoa's EEZ. Some of it might come from the Cook Islands occasionally as well. But a lot of the work that has happened here is in international waters, not too far from Hawaii, a little southeast of Hawaii. And there's a lot of data out there. Now, some people will say, a lot of that data is coming from companies or scientists who are employed by companies that aim to extract these resources, and that's absolutely true. But I will tell you, as someone who has spent a lot of time with a lot of these scientists, there's some very, very independent people, and some of them, are very are not in favor of seabed mining. They're not necessarily against it either, but their main job is doing scientific research. So they try not to take a position. They're very serious about their science, and their work is very good.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Scott. There's one more question from online, and then we'll move to questions in the room. The question was to clarify, could you please clarify your point about plumes? Initially, you had mentioned that there were no plumes, or there are no plumes with the new tech, and then later you talked about the plume that surrounds the harvester.
Yeah, so there with a harvester there is a plume. And the scientists from MIT have studied the plume dynamics really carefully, so we can say, with a lot of confidence that it doesn't migrate very high, just a couple meters, and horizontally it will move across the seabed a kilometer or two, depending on the topography. So that is absolutely a plume. We find that it's not very damaging to the organisms that live in that plume zone. Oliver's technology, he'll touch on it, but I think it creates a lot less plume, or maybe no plume, because they're using a machine that hovers above the seabed and uses robotic arms. There are different technologies out there that are being used. One thing that your audience should get comfortable with is there is a company out there, the metals company, that is going to create a plume in midwater, in about 2,000 meters of depth, where they're returning sediment from the bottom down a pipe to 2,000 meters, so that it's below the level of pelagic species out there. Personally, I would rather see these companies not create a midwater plume. Oliver's technology does not. I know other companies are using skip technologies that don't create that midwater plume. And I think, honestly, and this is just my opinion, that is kind of a best practice for the industry.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. I saw a hand up right over here. We have a question. Could you stand, please? I'll hold the mic.
Hi, do I say my name? Cassidy Mahuka, thank you for your presentation, Scott. You did say that a little west of Hawaii was international waters. I think you're incorrect about that, first of all. And you did state that the percentage of living organisms in the place that you guys decide to do the deep sea mining or the nodule harvesting has about 4,000, correct? Something like that? And
8,000 species, yeah.
okay, I would like to ask you, how do you know that for sure when only 20% of our ocean has been explored? And that's our recent data, and how do you know that there's only 8,000 species there? And then you said later on that we do not have all of the information, right? And then you say that we need to go ahead with this because of the costs and benefits, and if we wait any longer, we'll be devastating other parts of the world when we technically don't need to do that either.
Okay, Scott, there's a lot to unpack there, but real quick, regarding the location Scott was talking about, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone is between Hawaii and the West Coast. It sits in the international waters, and so that's what he's referring to. But can you address her question regarding the biomass?
Yeah, so scientists use a process that relies on something called, it's a statistical process based on sampling and sampling and sampling to figure out the number of species, and it uses something called the rarefication curve. But basically, it's a statistical analysis to figure out how many species are there, even though they don't know each species name and haven't characterized each species. So that's what they do in the bottom of the ocean. That's what they do in rainforests. That's what they do all over the place. So the answer to your question is no, they don't know perfectly, but they have a good idea, plus or minus, say, 10% of the amount of species that are resident in that area. And then as to your question about not having all the information, my point there is just that you'll never have perfect information. We've been studying this for 50 years now. We've spent close to $1 billion. We'll never have perfect information, just like we don't have perfect information about all the medicines that you use, all the vaccines that we take, any new technology that we use. We don't possess perfect information, but we do that cost-benefit analysis before we start using the technology. And my reading of the cost-benefit analysis right now is, especially when it comes to looking at human lives, that it's time to get serious about this business, and that doesn't mean going at it recklessly. That means adopting good regulations and adopting good monitoring, hygiene, and watching to make sure that the impacts are exactly what we think they are, and having built-in guardrails that we can't operate outside of. So it's a long discussion, and I'm happy to have it with you anytime to go through. But it's a complicated subject, and there's a lot of trade-offs.
Thank you, Scott. We have time for one more question with Scott.
Hi, Scott. My name is Lisa,
Hello.
and as we're talking about the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, why are we not mining in there? Why are we choosing the location in around near American Samoa? And I know that Michael mentioned earlier that Trump is concerned about China dominating the CCZ, and that's because the United States is kept out of the CCZ. So I know you're nodding your head in agreement. I also have another question, is about what type of equipment are you using for extraction? Because there's one that's a grappling, an arm grappling, and another one where you said that there's a vacuum and it deposits back into the ocean. Those two equipment you mentioned earlier are, I disagree with. I disagree with any type of sediment, any type of plumes that will affect the fish in this area. And you said that it doesn't affect human beings. It affects us because the fishes in this area are part of our marine ecosystem, and we depend on our fish. This is part of our food security. So I know you've said many other things that this is my voice that I disagree with. And I know you mentioned your 50 years of research, but it's not within our economic zone. And just a kind reminder, Scott, there is a moratorium to protect our economic exclusive zone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for the question. A lot to unpack there as well, Scott. Just for clarification, the moratorium that currently stands is for territorial waters. That is from our shoreline out to 3 miles. The rest of our EEZ is under federal. But to Lisa's point, Scott, regarding the technology, the plumes, and then in the interest of time, if you can also address the human aspect of deep sea mining versus terrestrial mining, I think that will capture most of what Lisa had asked.
One thing that Lisa brought up that I think is really important that you didn't mention, Michael, is, people have real concerns about impacts on fish and whale. This is why I made the point about the plume migration not moving more than a couple meters above the harvester, right? So the pelagic species, the fish that we're all familiar with, they go down to a few hundred meters, maybe 1,000 meters in some very extreme situations. They don't come close to anything that would impact them from this activity, nor do their food sources touch that. So that's a really important thing to note. We don't, we have to look at the facts, right? We have to look at the data, and that's what the data shows us. So, we don't think that fish or whales are endangered by that activity whatsoever. They're endangered by a lot of other things that people are doing in the ocean, but not by these crawlers that move along the bottom. In terms of the equipment, this is a new industry, and there's a lot of different equipment that's being proposed. Oliver has some great technology. He'll talk about that really soon. We're all hoping that really great technology that comes along that minimizes all of these impacts to the greatest degree possible. All of the operators just want that. They want Oliver to be really successful. They want anyone who comes along with great technology to be very successful so that we can minimize our already small impacts relative to terrestrial mining. And then as far, well, Mike kind of answered the question about the moratorium. Trump has taken a fairly controversial stance here and is trying to use U.S. regulations to go after resources in international waters. That's a real hot button. It's a complicated issue, and we're not going to solve it tonight. People have a lot of different opinions about that.
Okay, thank you, Scott, again, for your time and your presentation. Can we have a round of applause for Scott spending his time with us this evening? Scott is on the East Coast, and so it's a bit after midnight, Scott. So again, thank you very much for your staying up way past your bedtime.
Thank you for all the great questions. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, our next speaker is Oliver Gunasakara. Oliver is the CEO of Impossible Metals. The topic of his presentation is deep sea mining benefits to American Samoa. Impossible Metals has developed innovative technology for selective collecting of polymetallic nodules while preserving and protecting the marine ecosystem. In this presentation, he'll examine how the technology works, the economics behind it, and discuss the benefits for the community of American Samoa. Scott, Oliver?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everybody there in the room and online for letting me have the opportunity to introduce Impossible Metals. And specifically, what I wanted to talk about is what are the benefits to American Samoa. I think that there's been quite a lot of discussions about the potential risks. What I'd like to talk about is what is the actual benefits and how do we mitigate those risks. So as I said, I'm the CEO and co-founder. I guess our company is the one that kicked off this initiative. And so I do want to just make people aware, as a company, we're a US company, we're a B corporation. That means we have a public benefit as well as maximizing shareholder value. And we also are part of the Pledge 1%. So we've put 1% of our shares in trust. We donate 1% of our time. And we will also contribute 1% of our profits to non-profit organizations. So let me start with the benefits, and I see them as quite considerable. We, on our own, there is no legal obligation to do this, but it's just something we feel is the right thing to do. we have committed to provide 1% of the profits from the American Samoa EEZ to the community of American Samoa. And that's obviously subject to a lease going ahead and us winning the lease and actually getting into production. But as you'll see later, this could be many millions of dollars every year just donated to the community for the community to decide what they want to do with. And that's just a commitment that we have made on our own. There's no legal requirement to do that. Of course, we will have to pay lease fees and royalties, but these get paid to the federal government. But as is common in the continental USA, there are agreements now that offshore oil and gas and offshore renewable energy wind contributes back to the state that is adjacent to that offshore. And so we would encourage the federal government to follow this and do the same with critical minerals. Again, this could be hundreds of millions of dollars that could flow into American Samoa. And then, of course, the federal government is very, very motivated. We saw President Trump's executive order. And so I think there is a likelihood that you would see a lot of investment by the federal government in American Samoa. So think of upgrading the port. Think of a permanent Coast Guard ship and presence that could police your waters, stop illegal fishing from other countries coming into your waters. Think of expansion of military bases. Think of investments in power plants to provide cheaper energy for everybody. And then also think about the new jobs that this industry will create. I think the way to think about deep sea mining is how people may think about offshore oil and gas. In the 1960s, nearly all oil and gas was onshore, on land. But then some clever people figured out we could go into the ocean. And now approximately a third of all of oil and gas comes offshore. And it's because it becomes increasingly difficult to keep extracting from land. And so we believe that mining is going to go through that transition. And that's why you see a lot of activity in the international waters. Your neighbors in the Cook Islands, you see Japan investigating. We see India offering leases. Many countries are now getting involved in this. And this will result in huge numbers of jobs. You know, if you think about the manufacturing of the infrastructure and the maintenance of that infrastructure, the crews that would operate the ships, and then potentially we could even have the mineral processing happening in American Samoa. So these are just some of the potential benefits that could be made available. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the President Trump's executive order and the desperate need that the US as a whole, and in fact, most of Europe and the developed world desperately needs. The reality is that over the last 25 years, China has been able to invest heavily in places like Africa and Indonesia, and now controls almost all of these metals. You can see from copper to nickel to cobalt to rare earths to manganese, China controls the vast majority of them. This is a hugely worrying scenario. And compared to oil, where China had a very, very small amount of interest. And this is the type of thing that could lead to real difficult problems, which I'll touch on in a bit in the next slide. So the energy transition is real, it's happening, but it's hugely mineral intense. In fact, whenever we generate power, whether it's wind or solar or nuclear or coal or gas, it needs large amounts of these metals. And you can see that copper is dominant, but nickel and manganese and cobalt are also used. And so when you generate electricity, you need a lot of metal. When you transform and transport electricity in the form of the grid, you need huge amounts of copper. And then when you store electricity in the form of a battery, you need massive amounts of metal. In fact, an electric car needs 6 times more metal than a traditional gas-powered car. And then, of course, when you use the power, you have a motor or you have an alloy, you need these metals. So there's a huge demand coming for these metals. And all the analysts are showing that today, the market for the four metals we're talking about, nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, is about $500 billion globally. $500 billion a year are spent on these four metals alone. And the forecasts are it will double to $1 trillion a year by 2035. This is International Energy Association, but there's probably a dozen reports that will duplicate that. Fundamentally, the energy transition is moving away from oil and gas and moving to electrification. Electrification needs metal. So what happens if we don't get these metals? So I actually think the likelihood of a hot war with China drastically increases. China is in a massive lead. And the reason why wars start is when one side believes they can win. And unfortunately, America is so dependent on China for these metals, and we don't manufacture enough. And so China already has a bigger navy, it has a bigger military, and it knows that we're going to run out of all of these things if they put an embargo on. And so it's so critical that we get these, because otherwise the risk of actually going to war is really going to increase. And I think this is what's driving the president's executive order and all of his initiatives around critical minerals. But there's a second reason, and that's around climate change. It's real. I think you in American Samoa are on the front line. You know, sea level rise is happening. If we do not decarbonize, it will just accelerate, and you will lose a lot of your land. It will just be lost to sea level rise. We see that the fish stocks are now changing their migration due to climate change and temperature. And actually the deep ocean, even where the nodules are, is going to be impacted by temperature changes due to climate change. We've got to decarbonize, and that means massive amounts of these critical metals. It also means we've got to get them at the right price, because if the price keeps rising, we won't be able to afford electrification, and that will slow down the transition. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Norway. And Norway in the 1960s had a similar GDP per capita, about the same as American Samoa today, if we adjust for inflation. But guess what? Since 1960, it's increased 8 times. It's almost one of the most richest countries on the planet. And the reason why it has grown so much higher, remember these numbers ignore inflation, it's grown so high because of offshore oil and gas. In 1960, it was very similar to American Samoa, where fishing was its primary industry. And yet, today, it's absolutely one of the richest countries. It has a very, very high environmental standards, and it's also invested in deep sea mining. And the Norwegian government pension fund, where they captured some of this wealth, is the world's biggest. It's the largest sovereign wealth fund. You know, it's valued at $1.74 trillion. That's an incredible amount. That works out to over $310,000 to every single person in Norway. This is the opportunity that we could unlock together for American Samoa. So I want to now talk a little bit about technology, and specifically how technology changes the environmental impact, because what technology you use absolutely defines the environmental impact. The example I use is in the 60s, some people considered mining with nuclear bombs. Fortunately, it never happened, but it was considered. And of course, that impact would be outrageously bad. So you can never talk about protecting the environment or environmental impact without considering what tech people are using. And we have some incredible technology. Here is a picture of our vehicle we've tested off Florida in the deep ocean. And I'll talk a little bit more about how it really minimizes the environmental impact. So, we as a company, and the whole reason I created this company was to minimize the environmental impact. Our robots hover, they don't land, and they do not disturb the sediment more than that is done as we pick up the nodules. We don't have a riser system, we don't have a discharge out the back of the vehicle, we don't have a mid-water column. And we have incredible AI on our vehicle that's looking ahead of the vehicle, and it's looking for the larger forms of life, what are called the megafauna. This is super rare. You probably have to go a few square miles before you see anything, but it does exist, and if we detect it, the vehicle avoids it. It quarantines the area and just drives around it. Because it's selective harvesting, we can choose how much we remove. So by default, in our economic model, we are leaving 60% of the nodules undisturbed. But that can be programmed, and we will adjust based on scientific input. So this short video here, what this does is shows how the life detection works. And I want to be clear, we don't have to have pre-seen the life, because we are looking for the seabed nodules, and anything else we just assume is life, and we quarantine the area. These green circles means we're not going to connect anything in that area. So it's not like we have to have seen anything before. In fact, a subsea cable in our system will look like life, because it's not seabed and not nodules. And we control the lights, and we're looking ahead of the vehicle. So even any local disturbance that happens at the time we pick has no material impact, because we've tracked those nodules before we actually pick them. Fishing, huge industry for you, very, very important. And so what we know for a fact is that fisheries, specifically tuna, can't go very deep. They operate in the top part of the water column. Remember, we're at depths of up to 2.5 miles deep. That's where these nodules are. So the fish is nowhere near this. They're in the top few hundred meters. And the sediment disturbance that we will have will be a little bit of sediment as we pick up the nodule. Now, we haven't done any optimization. We've shown some videos. It will get significantly better as we optimize that. But even so, that's a tiny fraction. And we know from the testing, as Scott pointed out, this doesn't move more than 1 meter or 2 above the seabed. And so there's no ability for it to impact the plankton or the smaller life. And we don't have a discharge pool. There is no mid-water discharge. So we are absolutely convinced that there will be zero impact to fishing. But of course, you don't have to take our word for it. As part of the regulatory process, before any mining can happen, there will be an extensive environmental impact assessment where we will actually measure this and confirm 100% this is not the case. So talking about the environmental concerns, we were fortunate that we were not the first to do deep sea mining. We started this company about 5 years ago. And so we are aware of these concerns. Loss of the hard surface. If you remove all of the nodules, the octopus that lays its egg on the nodules can't survive. Well, we solve that by doing selective collection. We will only remove 8%. It's software programmable. Right now it's 60, but it could go even higher if we need to. Loss of the biodiversity. As Scott pointed out, the vast majority of the life is microscopic. You can only see it with a microscope. It's primarily bacteria. And what we do is we use the AI on the vehicle to look for these larger forms of life. If we see them, we avoid them. We don't disturb them. Sediment disturbance. We do not land. There is no tracks. There will be a little bit of sediment disturbance as we pick the nodule, but we will optimize that. We haven't done any of that optimizations. There is some fantasies out there that this is thousands of times more than the average. What the average doesn't take into fact is that there are seismic events. We just had a tsunami warning. That will have massive sediment. There's also benthic storms. So these are naturally occurring. There is sediment that gets moved around whenever there is a tsunami or other naturally occurring event. Noise and vibration. most of the noise will come from the ships, and it will be the propellers that make sure that the ships keep perfectly still. We don't have that tech. We've avoided a dedicated ship. We don't need what's called dynamic positioning. We don't have pumps that will generate noise in the mid-water column. So our noise footprint will be very, very low. Light. We do need light, but only when we're actually looking at the seabed. So our lights are off until we're at the seabed, and we will optimize the light to be the lowest level we can and to use the color that has the least impact. And then we've also committed to be net zero. So we've committed to no greenhouse emissions for our whole operation, and we will use offsetting if we cannot use technology to achieve that. So I just want to finalize, kind of talk a little bit about the technology. So, the traditional tech that I think most of the environmentalists are concerned about is the tech that was invented in the 60s and tested in the 70s. It's the dredging system. It's a big collector that is lowered to the seabed floor. It vacuums up the nodules and sends them up to the ship where they are dewatered and sent back. We think this has big cost downsides. It will destroy all of the habitat in front of it. And we also think that it's got lots of single points of failures. Our approach is radically different. And so I'm going to play a 60-second video of how our system works.
At Impossible Metals, we are developing autonomous underwater vehicles that are launched from a ship to the ocean floor, where there are vast fields of rocks called nodules that are rich in metals that are critical for low-carbon technologies like batteries. Hovering over the ocean floor, artificial intelligence uses cameras and aquatic arms to pick up each nodule individually, minimizing sediment disturbance and avoiding visible life, while leaving behind a percentage and pattern of nodules to preserve biodiversity and ecosystem services. The collected nodules are stored on board, and once the vehicle is full, it returns to the ship. The recovery crane is designed with motion compensation for fast docking, giving the vehicle a stationary target. Once on board the ship, nodules are offloaded and the battery is swapped before the vehicle's next trip to the seafloor. A key part of this system is that the fleet of underwater vehicles remains at sea. As one ship is filled with nodules, another arrives to continue the collection operation. Our highly scalable fleet is designed to reach the high production levels required to meet market demand.
So in the 2 minutes I have left, it's a very different approach, very different impacts. And, what I wanted to do was take an image. This is a real image from the Clarendon-Clipperton zone. You can see some megafauna here. This is what seabed actually looks like before any mining has happened. And this life that you see in the middle here, this white object, is extremely rare. Maybe every few miles that you'll see one of those. Now, with the traditional approach, this is what it would look like after it's been dredged. You'd see the tracks, and everything would be gone in between. But guess what? With our approach of leaving the majority of the nodules undisturbed, it's very hard to even tell the difference that we've taken some of these, and we've taken them by hovering. This is the testing that we did last year off Florida. This took the vehicle down to 6,000 feet, 2 kilometers, fully autonomous. This vehicle has been fully proven that it works in the deep ocean. And then finally, unit economics. At scale, we're looking at something like 271 robots operating, generating about $1 billion of profit per year for 25 years. Each robot would generate just under $11,000 of gross profit. This is not revenue, this is profit, and we would get a payback time of about 12 months. Highly profitable. We've published a detailed techno-economic analysis. This will be very, very lucrative for all parties involved. And then my last slide. This is some text that we wrote in the RFI that we in Possible Metals commit that we will only mine if we are satisfied that our environmental impact statement shows that there will be no material, long-lasting impacts on the marine habitat or other uses of the ocean, including fishing and recreation. So we are absolutely committed. If it's proven that this is not the case, I commit that we'll go and do something else. There's plenty of military use of our robot and other applications for the tech that we've invented. So my message to everyone is, let's unlock this new industry and let's make everyone in American Samoa to become like Norway and share in the economic benefits, whilst at the same time we preserve and protect the marine habitat. So thank you again for the opportunity. Happy to try and answer any questions that people.
Thank you very much, Oliver. We appreciate that. There are a couple of a bunch of questions coming in online. I'll pick a couple, and then we'll move to the room for questions here. There's a question regarding some large companies like Volkswagen and Google coming out and making public statements about taking a position against deep sea mining. Can you speak to that, and has that changed at all as data continues to come out?
So I think if you dig into the text of the moratorium, it says that they will not support deep sea mining until the regulations are adopted and an operation is performed under a legal framework that proves that there isn't a serious impact to the environment. So in that regard, everybody should sign up. We sign up to that. It's basically saying we don't support illegal mining. And so it's very easy for everyone to sign up to that, because it's basically saying we need a legal framework and we need to show through the scientific work of an environmental impact assessment that there will not be any long-lasting serious harm to the marine.
Okay, so just to recap what you said, these companies are saying they are for the moratorium, and within the moratorium, they're calling out the need for environmental assessments and giving guarantees that disturbance to the environment is minimal or along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're basically saying they don't support illegal mining, which is to
illegal
go
mining
to the ocean without any legal frameworks, because all legal frameworks require this environmental impact assessment.
Okay, great. There was one more question online that I wanted to ask. The question was to restate or clarify what your deal, and this is not my question, what your deal is for American Samoa. I know you started off your presentation by discussing profit sharing, which is not an obligation, but you decided as a company to make that commitment.
Yeah, so we've committed that 1% of the profits that we make from a commercial mining operation in the exclusive economic zone of American Samoa will be donated to the community to spend as they see fit. And if we achieve our, 1 billion a year, that obviously would be 10 million a year.
Okay, great. All right, do we have questions? I have one up here, and then I see one in the back. Let me come over to Dr. Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Anga. I represent a local nonprofit organization that promotes resilience and self-determination. Thank you for the promises that American Samoa would benefit from deep sea mining from your company, and that collection will be responsible, and that you won't move until the environmental assessment has been done. And these are promising goals, but they require real structure. And as you said yourself, there are no legal requirements. I think what American Samoa needs is not promises, but legal foundations. One, that there's a framework for benefit sharing. Right now, there's no statutory requirement that American Samoa would get any of the economic benefits from deep sea mining. Another legal foundation is that there's local consent, because we're a territory with distinct legal and cultural status. I haven't heard any of you talk about that. That their investment in region-specific science, not data borrowed from other oceans. And you and the previous presenter said it, the data's from somewhere else. Please look at our own ocean. The first gentleman said that it's remote. This area is not remote for us. And the third point, to make sure there are legal foundations, is authentic engagement with Samoan institutions, not symbolic gestures. You should know that we have elders here tonight. Our community is listening. You're saying one thing that you think is true, but we are hearing something else. However, I do want to thank you very much for taking the time and explaining much of this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Oliver?
Yeah, thank you for those comments. So you're correct. There is no current legal statute that guarantees American Samoa would have a share. But there are precedents. We know for a fact that offshore oil and gas in the continental USA with the states and offshore wind do share revenue. And so that is something that I think we would absolutely support, but it needs congressional support as well to make that happen, and we would recommend that that does. There is a legal requirement under the BOEM regulations and the law to do environmental impact and comply with NEPA. And my expectation is that that would involve doing a mining test and collecting environmental baseline data in American Samoa waters. And that data would be crucial to understanding what impact, if any, mining operation would happen. And finally, I completely agree. We need to have more of these discussions to discuss more with elders, with church leaders and others to understand the pros and the cons. As I said, I do think there's an opportunity to be like Norway, and I think that's something that we should think about. I recommend to read things about.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. We have a couple of more, 2 minutes to be specific, left for Oliver. We have a question in the back of the auditorium here.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Moira Mayava, and I'm a landowner, coastal area, and a beach owner. The first comment was to Mr. Scott about the economic benefit. I think it's an insult that it's 1%, and this is our ocean. And then second, the presentation that was just seen is all animation. You've been doing this for 5 years. Is there a possibility that you can show us actual footage of the bottom of the ocean in our oceans on top of what Dr. Anga was just talking about?
Thank you for the question. I'll add before you can respond, Oliver, that in our last public forum, BOEM spent a lot of time talking about their process, and much of the real-world environmental activity and studies will happen, but it will happen downstream at some point in the near future. But if you wouldn't mind responding to the comment and the question, please.
Yeah, I think, many millions of dollars a year is not an insubstantial amount of money. We have voluntarily offered, as I said, there's no legal requirement for us to do this. This is something that we have voluntarily done. To my knowledge, no other mining company has. And so I think, many millions of dollars every single year for production is not an insignificant amount of money that we have made as a gesture, as well as the jobs and infrastructure that our operations would ultimately result in. And then the second part of the question, we haven't yet done testing in the waters of American Samoa. Obviously, we're a North American-based company, and it is logistically challenging and expensive, but that is something we absolutely do want to do. I would hope that next year we would be in a position to bring one of our Eureka robots to American Samoa, show the community, and also do some test mining at the same time.
Okay, thank you very much, Oliver. We have one more question in the back before we move on to our final speaker.
Hello, Talofa. Oliver, thank you very much for your time and sharing the information this evening. I wanted to ask about the benefits to American Samoa. A lot of the bullets that you shared were potential, not only potential, but can you talk a little bit about what direct benefits there are to American Samoa as a result of the operation? For example, have you worked with any communities or in any EEZs prior to this application that you can share some of the benefits, direct benefits that those communities have experienced as a result?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, this is our first application. We don't currently have any exploration areas, and so this is the first community that we are potentially engaging in. And let's be clear, we're at the very start of the process. So BOEM has decided to hold an RFI, then they have to do environmental work, then they have to decide to hold a lease, then a company has to bid, a company has to win, then they have to do more environmental work. So we're on quite a long road to get there. And our commitment is that if we're successful in winning that bid, we would do more engagement with the community and we would share more of the benefits. As I said, I can only commit to benefits that are under my control, which is the profit sharing. But we are very keen to be operating ships, and so that would be crew. We would love to do mineral processing in the US. And with my discussions with the US administration, with people in the White House, I think it's very likely that some of I think it's about $8 billion that was in the big beautiful bill that passed through Congress for critical minerals. I think a significant portion of that could be deployed on deep sea mining and could be deployed in American Samoa. But to be clear, I can't commit that. That's not in my remit, but I can encourage and lobby and hope and try to make this happen.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. One final comment here before we move on to our third and final speaker.
Thank you, Oliver, for the presentation. Just a follow-up question on the profit sharing. I understand this is globally, this is about $130 trillion industry. So I wanted to ask how you were able to determine the 1% profit share when there really is no data and no cost estimates because there hasn't been any extraction. I just want to make sure that the 1% that you're offering to the territory is fair.
Yeah. So as I said, this is completely voluntary. In addition, we will pay lease fees and royalties to the federal government. Our hope is that some of that would be shared, but those are mandatory. We already had commitment, as we are a pledge 1% company. And so I already have approval from our board of directors to donate 1% of our profits. And so we are just deciding to spend that money. We will give that money to someone, but we've now made the commitment that it will go to the community of American Samoa for any profits that come from American Samoa's water. So that's how we raise the 1%. But we're going to have to pay a lease fee. We're going to have to pay a royalty. There's large amounts of capital we will ultimately need to raise to build the fleet of robots and operate the ships. And so, I think at this stage, I think this is a gesture that I think could result in many millions of dollars every year once we get into production, that the community could decide to build a new school or community center or other things that they wish, or hospital, etc.
Okay, and with that, thank you very much, Oliver, for your presentation. How about a round of applause for Oliver for taking the time to meet with us regarding benefits to American Samoa. Now, our third and final speaker for the night is Victor Vescovo. Victor's topic this evening will be the uncertainties of deep sea mining. Victor, who strongly emphasizes that he's not a professional environmentalist, but is a venture capitalist and an investor, will provide a different perspective on deep sea mining. The statements being made and the technology being shared and used. He'll share his position and his views, also to include his comments on financial projections. Finally, Victor will also present recommendations that he has for the community of American Samoa. Victor, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, Michael. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Victor.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the time today and for being able to present to this community. I'd just like to start by saying I think of all the people attending this conference, I'm the only person who's actually been to 4,000 meters and actually collected rocks from the bottom with a manipulator arm. I've spent a great deal of time below 4,000 meters doing exploration on the seafloor, but I'm also a venture capitalist. So I greatly respect what Impossible Metals and Scott Vincent and others try to do from a financial standpoint to build new technologies and invent new industries. But I simply believe that unfortunately that for deep sea mining, that there are a lot of significant promises that are being made and assumptions about technology that, in my own opinion, as an industrial investor and someone who used to own a metal recycling company as well in the United States, that it's simply not going to work. And therefore, I'll go through some of the details in my presentation. Okay, let's see if I can get this to advance. Let's talk first about American Samoa. This is your territory. And this is about large corporations potentially coming in and exploiting your resources. This isn't about the rainforests in Indonesia or where a lot of minerals are mined in the deserts of Australia or the tundra of Canada. This is about what happens to your waters in your community. I want to put that out there. I certainly am not going to say this is what you should or should not do. This is about the people of American Samoa doing their own research, making their own determinations about the environmental risks, about the potential benefits, and then doing what they think is most important for their community. We're only having a debate about deep sea mining because people think it will make money. Make no mistake about this. This is not about altruism. It's not about saving lives. It's not about breaking Chinese dominance. If you wanted to do those things, you'd do them on a pro bono basis, or the government would do it. Companies want to come to American Samoa to mine the seafloor to make money. If there was no money involved, they wouldn't be doing it. Even Mr. Vincent said that he thinks it's a great investment. And I have great respect for Oliver and what he's doing. But you wouldn't be doing this if it didn't make money. But will it? What could go wrong? Just as an example, no one talks about this has been tried before, deep sea mining. Off of Papua New Guinea, over about 10 or 15 years ago, a predecessor company called Nautilus, which is basically the same executive team that runs the metals company, they tried to do deep sea mining and it burned hundreds of millions of dollars of investor money. It left an environmental disaster off the coast of Papua New Guinea and it failed. No one talks about that, but this really happened. Over 157 million was lost trying to make this work. And it doesn't work because the ocean environment is extremely difficult to operate in when you go at any kind of depth. You must take my word for this. I've spent over 4 years doing deep sea exploration in a 12-ton submersible, working with a manipulator arm, very similar to the one shown here, and things break all the time. It is an incredibly hostile and brutal environment, which all the people from American Samoa who live right next to the ocean and operate in it, you know that, how brutal it is and how it tears up equipment right and left. When you talk about deep sea mining, it's not about 7 metals, it's not about 50 critical minerals, it's really only about 4 metals. There are only 4 metals of any economic consequence when you mine polymetallic nodules: nickel, cobalt, copper, and manganese. Copper and manganese are relatively plentiful on the Earth's crust and from terrestrial mines. Even at maximum production rates of all the deep sea mining companies that are out there, they would produce a fraction of 1% of worldwide copper production. You're not going to in any way challenge terrestrial mining from copper. Manganese is very similar. The largest producer of manganese, by the way, is South Africa and Gabon. It's not China. And really quickly on China, the reason why China dominates so many critical minerals is not because of where they get the metal. It's because they process it. China doesn't care about the environmental consequences. They have a low labor rate, and they have decades of experience processing these metals. The West, the rest of the world, outsourced metal refining and distribution to China because it was the cheapest way to do it, and there was no apparent threat at the time. It's not where you get the rocks. It's where you process it that gives China dominance. And you can see that now with rare earth metals in the United States. The Trump administration just invested $400 million in a domestic rare earth metal production facility in the US to process that there as well. That's how you do it. It's not about getting minerals from the seafloor to break China's monopoly. So let's talk about nickel and cobalt. Those are two valuable metals that are in polymetallic nodules on the seafloor. That's it. Just those two matter. So when you talk about deep sea mining, people shouldn't think there are all these things that are going to create a cornucopia of wealth like Norway. And by the way, if you want to be rich like Norway, you need oil, not modules. Norway got wealthy and has the largest pension fund in the world now because of oil extraction, not deep sea mining. They have not started deep sea mining, and now actually there's a moratorium on it. So comparisons to Norway are just completely invalid because they got rich off oil. This is what happens when you pull up a polymetallic nodule. This is the actual composition on average of polymetallic nodules in the Pacific. 69% of it is pretty useless. It's iron and other useless minerals. 28% is manganese, and that's a lot, but it's actually the least valuable metal in the nodules. 1.3% is nickel, 1.1% is copper, 0.2% is cobalt. I know there's math on this slide, but the general point I'm trying to make is these prices per ton for these metals, and again, they're the only four metals that really matter, this is their market price as of yesterday. $33,000 a ton for cobalt, $15,000 a ton for nickel. You multiply them by the concentration, and right now, market price, the value of a polymetallic nodule is as indicated, okay? That's what they're worth right now. Oliver spoke about the techno financial model that was just published by the Impossible Metals. This is all their data. This is taken from their spreadsheet. They're saying at their full production rate, and that wouldn't happen until the 2030s, by the way, they would harvest 6.8 million tons per year for revenue of $4 billion. So their assumed value is $633 per nodule. That sounds pretty great. That's how Oliver gets his $1 billion per year profit, because they're going to generate $633 per nodule. And to them, it only costs about $400 a nodule. This is 62% higher than the current market value. So what explains that difference? Well, the difference is that the mathematical model that Impossible Metals is using assumes a 62% higher price because they take an average price for those metals over the last 5 years. Huge difference. That's not reality. It's backward looking for the last 5 years. Well, prices of metals vary. They go up, they go down. Well, not exactly. In the last 5 years, these are the price graphs of those two key metals, nickel and cobalt. Over the last 5 years, they've been on a steady downward trend, particularly cobalt, but also nickel. They're now down at some of their lowest points in 5 years. Well, the argument would go, oh, they're going to rebound when all this demand kicks in. What none of them have talked about, though, is that there's been a huge shift in the consumption for these two metals, the only two metals that really drive profitability, and that's electric vehicle batteries. Back in the 2015s, the early 2020s, most batteries did use a lot of nickel and cobalt, but that has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. This graph just shows the major point is that electric vehicle batteries that were previously based primarily on nickel and cobalt now primarily use iron and phosphorus, very common metals that are much cheaper than nickel and cobalt. And that dark blue area is the share of batteries that use primarily nickel and cobalt. It is going down dramatically. And now there are even new batteries that use sodium technology that is even less expensive than iron and phosphate. So technology, as it does, is replacing the need for these metals, which is why their prices are going down and while they will continue to stay down. So the profitability of any deep sea mining operation is severely jeopardized by the price changes in these metals. And again, if these two metals, nickel and cobalt, go down, their business models don't work because that's all you can really get that's valuable from deep sea modules. So if you look at their financials, their cost per ton is $369 per ton of polymetallic nodules. The current market value of a polymetallic nodule, as I showed earlier, is about 390. That gives them a 5% margin of error if everything goes right according to their financial projections. And when you're talking about operating for the first time at scale in the deep ocean, nothing ever goes right. Just looking back at the animation that was shown in showing the swapping out of batteries, I shook my head because one of the major problems we had at depth, below 1,000 meters, any electrical connection, any gasket, anything moving causes severe stress because it's under 4,000 to 5,000 pounds per square inch, and those connections will break, they will corrode. All of you are exposed to the sea every day. You know what saltwater corrosion does. And now you're going to put it under pressure continuously, 24/7. It's going to break and really harm their business models because they're not going to get the yield they expect. For example, these are the two machines that Impossible Metals is contemplating putting at basically 4,000 meters. Never been done before. AI enhanced, vision systems, all this complexity. And yet again, it's going to be operating under crushing pressures. They have never tested their machines at anything, I believe, lower than 2,000 meters. The world changes when you put machines under that immense pressure. All the spindly extraction arms that they're going to be using, again, I had problems with a single manipulator arm on my submersible. In fact, one of them came off the submarine at depth because the pressure was so intense it corroded all the connections. And this was a state-of-the-art advanced submersible. They're going to have many of these devices constantly in operation. It's going to be very difficult. The Titanic is in shallower water than where they're going to be mining. Here's just an example of one of the, they say it's going to be simpler. It's going to be, not that hard to mine the seafloor with their new technology. This is just an example of what they're going to have to do to get the machines working in the open ocean. Many of you are fishermen or know fishermen or have operated on the sea off the coast of Samoa. Can you imagine working this kind of complex machinery for the first time in the first 5 years of how often it's going to break or how difficult it's going to be? I admire the ambition. I truly do. But the ocean does not reward complexity. You all know that. It rewards simplicity, or it's going to actively destroy your equipment. This is an actual screenshot. I think someone earlier asked a question, can you show actual video, not an animation of what happens with their equipment operating the seafloor? This is a still from their operation as they're collecting nodules. Yes, it kicks up silt. I have serious questions about their ability of their vision systems to account for the silt that will be raised that could be moved around by even a modest current. It was one of the major problems I had when I dove at the bottom of the ocean, was actually getting what we called silting out. Even the most minor motion, even the most minor interaction with the seafloor that has a consistency of talcum powder at the bottom of the ocean, it will blind all of your vision systems. I know I couldn't see out of my submersible even after a minimal interaction with the seafloor. They have not tested their full-scale equipment at these incredible depths, at that type of seafloor. So therefore, the key points I've been trying to make are the financial projections that the mining companies are using are extremely optimistic. They're saying that they'll produce billions of dollars for American Samoa, but that's based off a 1% commitment off $1 billion. If they don't make money, if they make $100 million, which again, I seriously doubt, that would be just $1 million. And again, it's not even a contractual equipment, it's a promise by the company. If there's no money in mining, there's going to be no money for American Samoa. I can't emphasize enough that the technology to mine the seafloor is very new. It's never been done at scale. No company has built their full-scale operating models, and it's going to be far more difficult and expensive and require far much more money and investment. And these are already multi-billion-dollar investments. Two more key points. There's no way just to collect nodules from the seafloor. They make it sound like it's like nothing easier than picking up seashells on the seashore. This is operating at 4,000 to 5,000 meters of depth. Absolutely crushing, brutal environments, completely dark, saturated with corrosive seawater, working heavy machinery 24/7 with no human supervision. It's very difficult. And finally, again, if no money is made, especially in the first 5 to 10 years, as they try to make this work, they'll receive no pay. And you'll instead, like Papua New Guinea, be left with very damaged swaths of your seafloor that could affect your fishing. They simply don't know. There was an earlier point raised by one of the people that posed a question that said, yeah, where are all the studies that are in American Samoa? Not these other areas that have been explored. What about our territory? It hasn't really been done. These are just my suggestions. It is up to the people of American Samoa to decide what to do. But I think there have been some really good questions, and this is what I would suggest. Be really careful of bold claims of mining companies that promise you the moon, that have never done this before, and make, in my viewpoint, false equivalences of saying it's better to save thousands of lives in these other countries where terrestrial mining is done. We should mine the seafloor instead. Even at their maximum production rates, like the metals company, for example, they would produce an amount of nickel and cobalt that is less than 3% of total world production. Seafloor mining, even if it worked, would have no major impact on terrestrial mining. It's not a question of saving the rest of the world. First off, you should be concerned with what happens to American Samoa, but those are not accurate comparisons. I believe that American Samoa should continue to research this opportunity. What can they actually do? Build some full-scale machines, test them in your waters, in your environment, and see what they actually do. All this urgency, I think is misplaced, because it's not as if this is going to happen within the next 5 years. They're going to have to scale up, even if it did work. And it's not like thousands and thousands of people are going to die if you don't do deep sea mining tomorrow. But you absolutely could rush into a circumstance where machines are operating on your seafloor, ripping it up and causing environmental damage that you could have understood earlier if they'd done more studies. That's why I think the moratorium on the territorial waters was a great idea by American Samoa. They should continue that for their EEZ. I do believe you really need to take control of your legal agreement. As has been raised several times, there is nothing in the current BOEM agreement that requires Impossible Metals to pay American Samoa. And if you really believe that an American mining company with its board of directors and its shareholders that have invested tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars are just going to voluntarily give money away, especially if things go sideways, well, you probably know what the history of that is. If you want something, you've got to put it into good legal language. So you must take control of your own destiny, have your own attorneys look at it, because right now, from my reading of the contract from BOEM, it is extremely one-sided in terms of the mining companies and not American Samoa. And finally, if and when you agree to do research in your waters, which again, look, let them do research. Let them figure out if it can work. I could be wrong. I understand that. But don't rush into anything. And if they do research, people from American Samoa should be on the ships. There should be incredibly high transparency about what is happening. What is the collection rate of machines? What is its breakdown rate? How much money are they actually spending? Will this actually make money? Based on your observations, not their sanitized, opaque reports that they're going to publish in a dark room. And you should be on the ships actually looking at the environmental data as well and getting the video feeds from their collectors. That's how I think this should happen. I never want to stop progress. I'm a venture capitalist too. I make money for my investors. But this is a bit different because this directly interacts with an environment that could be destroyed upon which your livelihood depends. To summarize, this is my viewpoint, but it's based on my experience as a deep sea marine explorer, as a venture capitalist, and as someone who has done metal processing. Deep sea mining is extremely challenging technically. There's no question it's destructive. It's only a question of degree. Very expensive. It's a financial solution to a battery metals problem that existed 10 years ago. If it's environmentally damaging and, as Oliver said, they'll go do something else, I doubt that. I don't think they're going to make billions of dollars having nodule collecting robots working for the Department of Defense. They have to mine and make it work, or they're going to go bankrupt. It's not going to yield the profits or royalties that are promised, and it'll destroy tens of thousands of kilometers of virgin seafloor if you don't carefully manage it. And the reason I'm doing this, I don't make any money if they fail. I don't make any money if they succeed. I'm doing it because I'm quite certain of what the outcome of this industry will be. And I personally don't want to see tens of thousands of square kilometers of seafloor ripped up just to prove my point. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you very much, Victor, for that presentation. Any questions from our crowd? We have 10 minutes for questions, and so if I may ask, given the lateness of the hour, to please be specific and brief with your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Nina Tua'auglore. I'm from the village of Amanave here in American Samoa. Mr. Victor, I want to say to you that I don't want to get rich. I don't want Samoa to get rich, but we want to be safe. Our future generation depend on our sea. And this is also the security of our food. It's very important, and you have given me an opportunity to thank you for making sure that I understand what this sea mining is all about. I'm so afraid for our future generation. As I said, I don't want to get rich. I want to be safe on my island. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful.
Thank you very much for your comments. Any other questions from the room for Victor? Question here.
Hi, Victor. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Archie. I have two questions. The first question, I think your position is pretty clear in opposition to deep sea mining. So I wanted to ask if you have any competing interests with respect to the fact that you're an investor or a venture capitalist. That's my first.
Sure. First, I'll answer the previous question or comment first. I want American Samoa to be safe and rich. I just don't think deep sea mining is the way that they get rich safely. To your question, do I have a conflict of interest? Well, one, the previous two speakers absolutely are agencies in that they have invested in deep sea mining companies. I have no position in deep sea mining, either for it or against it. I think it's been raised in the popular media that I have a venture capitalist investment in asteroid mining. That is completely different than deep sea mining. The metals that one goes after to try and mine asteroids in space are platinum group metals. They are worth 3 orders of magnitude more than nickel and cobalt. You don't mine asteroids to get nickel, cobalt, manganese, or copper. It's a completely different thing. So any attempts to disenfranchise my viewpoint because I've invested in a company that's trying to mine in space where there's no environmental consequences, and you're mining minerals that are far different and far more valuable than what you would find on the seafloor, I think is disingenuous. So no, I do not believe I have any degree of conflict of interest here. And I don't work for any environmentalist group either, so I'm not really trying to raise money for them either, as was alluded to earlier.
Not to be argumentative, but if deep sea mining in these critical minerals is harvested and they're proven to be much more cost effective than what you're investing in, I think that may be a potential concern for you from your vantage point. My second question is with respect to the positions that you have made on the fact that, seabed mining is expensive, it's difficult, and it harms the environment. I know we're years away, and if all those concerns are addressed, are you willing to change your position if they are effectively and responsibly extracted?
First, your original point is I don't believe deep sea mining is in any way going to be more cost effective than terrestrial mining. We've been mining on land for thousands of years, and we have never commercially mined the seafloor. So I just think it's very, very unlikely. If mining the seafloor cured cancer, I'd be trying to help the companies trying to figure out how to do it, but that's not the case. Again and again, there are only two metals of any economic consequence in deep sea mining, nickel and cobalt, and their prices have been declining for the last 4 years. So therefore, for it to be profitable, the cost structure has to be even better than terrestrial mining. And from personal operating in these deep ocean environments and looking at the equipment they want to use to mine the seafloor, I simply do not see as an industrial investor how they can make it work. Their yield is not going to be what it's going to be. And the cost of maintaining and keeping the equipment operating is going to be much worse than they expected. And the margin for error is so slim. So I just simply disagreed that with my personal experience in investing in high technology ventures with new technology, especially in the ocean, that it is just far too optimistic. So American Samoa and the countries that are being pitched to allow for mining in their areas, they should just be much more careful and see demonstrated proof that these machines are not going to dramatically impair the environment and that it can work economically. And if they can, then it will be their decision to actually go forward with it or not. But I simply think the odds of that happening are extremely low. And that's why I encourage them to investigate thoroughly first before making any major decisions like commercial contracts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Victor, for your response. Any other questions in the back of the room? Here we go.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, for your presentation. But this question is actually for Oliver. Victor, you presented an economic case where it's not successful. Oliver, can you provide a position why you think this is successful in terms of the pricing that's being used in Victor's analysis?
Yeah, so we are at historic low prices, and there are many companies whose full-time job it is to forecast metal prices going forward. In fact, CRU just published their data as part of the metals company pre-feasibility study. So there are half a dozen companies whose exclusive job is to forecast metal pricing. And it is true that at today's metal prices are at historic lows. But these companies that have, for instance, Benchmark Mineral Intelligence recently put out a chart showing that they expect the long-term value of nodules to be over $600. These companies have 250 employees, and all they do is write and forecast on metals. So with the respect to Victor, he's not an expert in this area. There are many companies that are, and all of them are predicting that the metal prices will rise. And then, you know, to Victor's points about unproven, not tested, well, Eureka 2 is designed for 6 kilometers. We haven't quite gone there, but all the components we buy come with a test certificate, and the components we buy ourselves, we test in a testing chamber. So we know how to design this technology. And frankly, I'm a little surprised that a VC that is afraid of taking technical risks. You know, if everyone operated that way, there would be no innovation. Ultimately, it is for the smart companies to create new technologies, test them, and get them to scale. And everything will not work the first time. But without this innovation, we would still be living in a cave. And so I'm a little surprised to hear a VC that is terrified of the ocean and taking any technical risk, because there are plenty of underwater robots. He himself has been inside of one that has gone very, very deep. So this tech can be designed and can be built. And we've been building underwater robots now for 25 years.
Thank you very much for...
Can I rebut?
Yeah, real quick,
sorry, can I rebut
Victor,
real quickly?
just real quick. Thank you, Oliver. I wanted to toss it back to you, Victor, to again, of course, respond to Oliver's comments, but also earlier there was a comment made by Scott regarding the economics of deep sea mining, and if they just don't pencil out, wouldn't the initiative to proceed forward with it just die on the vine? If you wouldn't mind commenting, please.
Sure. First, to Oliver's comments, he said that all these research companies are predicting higher value for the polymetallic nodules. That's simply not true. All metals research companies are not projecting higher prices. If they did, no, everybody would just invest in the metals and make easy money and not even have to mine them. There is dispute, and no one saw the crash in the prices of cobalt and nickel over the last 5 years because they overestimated demand. So predicting the value of the metals in the future is very hard. If he really believed that, why didn't he use the future projections in his own financial modeling? He used historical numbers, not the projections that he just said are great. Second, with respect to the component testing, I did the exact same thing with my submersible. We tested the components in pressure chambers. The problem is when you put them all together and then put them down together as a system at 4,000 meters, that's when everything starts breaking. The interconnections of all these systems, operating them 24/7 in corrosive salt water. That's the real hard part. It's not just the components. Back to the question on Oliver's point. What was the question from Oliver? I'm sorry, from Scott?
Yeah, Scott had made the point that if the economics behind deep sea mining just don't pencil out, well, why wouldn't the initiative just die on the vine?
Oh, okay, of course. Yeah, I get that point where, sure, let them do it. The difference between investing in deep sea mining and investing in, say, some high technology factory on land is the fact in the process of trying to do this, they have the great risk of destroying large sections of the seafloor, areas that are very unexplored, especially around American Samoa, and we don't know what they're going to end up destroying. It was actually some marine animals and chemistries that were used, just for example, to help find the mRNA vaccine for COVID. We don't know what kind of cures, what kind of biological material we're going to be destroying for the sake of proving that this economic case won't work. So I'm not saying just stop it completely. I'm saying be very careful and do the research and prove that it can work economically before you start doing commercial operations. They just want to launch right into full-scale commercial production because they have a clock ticking on their invested money, but that should not be the driver for the people whose communities are affected. And finally, with respect to my own, how can I as a venture capitalist not take risks? I take risks every day. I'm investing in asteroid mining. I invested in a company that just de-extincted dire wolves. That was hard, but it's not ripping up the seafloor. It's taking experiments in laboratories, and if it works, great. So those are my differences of opinion with the other two. And I do find it interesting that the proponents of DSM had not to spend twice as much time as those that are against it.
Thank you very much, Victor, for your response. How about a round of applause for our three presenters tonight? I believe Victor wins the award for the latest time. He's in Iceland. So he's in Iceland, and Scott is on the East Coast, so it's past midnight for these folks. And then, of course, Oliver is in California, but it's well past their bedtime. So again, please, a round of applause for these gentlemen for spending their time with us tonight. And we're going to continue this conversation, gentlemen, here in American Samoa as we move through this process. And for the benefit of those attending tonight and watching online, the BOEM process is a lengthy process, and it is going to address many of the concerns raised by Victor, specifically the concerns around the environmental impacts that any deep sea mining might have on our environment, our fisheries, and our islands. The process of exploration first, it comes before any exploitation. And there's a real possibility that after the data is collected and after the environmental assessments are done, that BOEM will not approve us moving forward with exploitation. But all of this exists out in front of us. Over the next 2 years, these processes will start to unfold. And as Victor had mentioned, it's important that we remain engaged, fully engaged with BOEM, that we're there side by side watching this process evolve, participating in the process actively, and again, being a part of the process every step of the way. But again, we've run our 2 hours, our dedicated 2 hours, and I know it's late, it's 6:55, and so before we do wrap up here, we did want to thank a few folks. We want to thank KVZK TV for being here to help us stream this live to all of our communities here and abroad. We also want to thank Azteca for their Wi-Fi hotspots here at the Lee Auditorium. We appreciate you guys being a valued partner in this effort. And I also want to extend our thank you to co-chair Dr. Mahuka and the rest of our Deep Sea Mineral Task Force for all the work that they put into this event tonight. Again, as Don had mentioned early on, this is a series of outreach opportunities. And so, again, as you listen and as you read and as you do your own research, we encourage you to be engaged, be a part of the discussion. As a reminder, the BOEM public comment period is open until August 15th. And so please, again, formulate your comments, your opinion, your position, and submit the comments via the BOEM portal. If you have any difficulties finding out how to do that, please reach out to any of the folks in the back at the Resilience Office, at DMWR, or myself. And with that, I would like to turn the time back over to Don to close out our evening.
Once again, we'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight and for participating in tonight's forum. And as you leave, just a couple of things. Please remember that you can stay involved by contacting the task force, as mentioned by Mr. McDonald. And also remember that feedback forms and info materials are available at the back. And for future forums and updates, it will be announced through the governor's office and local media. At this time, I'm now going to go ahead and close us off with a word of prayer. Our dear, most gracious Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this evening, and we thank Thee for allowing us to engage in meaningful discussion, especially on this topic. And we pray for Thy guidance to continue to be upon our people so that we can be able to learn more about this topic and that we can be able to move forward with Thy guidance. And we pray for Thy blessings and protection upon us all who are here tonight. And we say these things humbly in the sacred name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, Faftaitse Lava once again for joining us, and that concludes our program this evening. Faftaitse Lava.